All right. Good morning, everyone. Hello. Thanks for having me. So is this a situation where I just do this and you change? All right, cool. Well, good morning. Thank you for having me. Excited to be the first person, so I don't have to be anxious for too long to speak. Appreciate everyone being here. As she said, I think y'all know enough about me by now, but recently started a private practice a couple of years ago in Colleyville, about 9 miles from here, working with adults. I ran a program at TCU for a while, working with substance use, worked with my CEO to make a program for treatment for them, and then I was clinical director of Arise Recovery Centers. Great company, they're right out there. Talked to Tammy about it, and still do some consulting with them because I love what they do and believe wholeheartedly. This is one of my favorite things to do, is just to provide outreach and connect with others maybe I otherwise wouldn't. I'm curious, by show of hands, who here works in mental health? Okay. Who here doesn't work in mental health? All right. Who here works in the spirituality side or spiritual leadership? Okay, great. This just gives me an idea of the audience I'm talking to and try to tailor it to that. I was scrambling my brain when I was putting this together, excited when Sylvia reached out, because I work a lot with outside partners. I like to tell my clients, therapy is not what you do in the rooms, it's what you do outside of here, right? I get 45 to 55 minutes with you once a week. It's the thousands of hours we don't see each other, and how you create meaning in your life and make changes and attune to your strengths and look at the things you want to change, right? The spiritual community has so much to do with that, right? So does so many other people. So someone said the word systemic earlier. I think it was over there, NTBHA. Systemic work is a big part. And so I want to talk about that, bridging the gap, and try to touch on some things that I hope you'll walk away with something. I also encourage, if we have time, I have Sylvia keeping time, but maybe some interaction as we go through this. I can skirt through things if they don't apply and kind of see what you all want to learn. So we can go next slide, though. So what I want to cover today, talk a little bit about, if I had 8 hours, I could really go over all of these things, but talk about a little bit of the trends, the issues in our current metroplex, understand the basics of what recovery is, the basics of addiction, and I'm also talk a little bit about behavioral addiction too, and kind of wrap them together. Some approaches. I'm going to give you some real-world applications, talk about local resources. You'll probably notice I'm pretty solution-focused in how to get people care. And then I will explain a little bit of levels of care. I think some of you probably know quite a bit about it, but maybe some of you don't. So we'll kind of tailor it to that. Yeah, I'm ready for the next one. Thank you. So I'll start with why this conversation matters. Most of you are working in the mental health space, so you probably know at this point, we're not the first people they come to, right? It's their pastors, it's their friends, it's their family, it's someone when they're really drunk that just happens to be at the bar right beside them. It's not us most times. Usually when there's mental health intervention, especially in couples work, right, it's in crisis. So a lot of times when they come to us, not always, but when they do come to us, it is stabilization. It's, how do I regulate? How do I stop drinking every day? How do I build connections again after shattering my life? So you all are a really important part of that. And so talking about spiritual means to get help, reducing stigma. I want to talk a little bit about stigma, maybe some more solution-focused research ways to approach someone and try to approach with compassion and acceptance. Talk about, really, faith communities can become and often already are powerful recovery ecosystems. I was just talking to the senior pastor right before this, and he told me all about, since 1992, I think it was, they've all ran groups about anger and addiction and communication, and we have so many resources that are already out there that I'll talk about as we go. And then I had a whole separate lecture on this. I won't go too much into it today, but talking about some of the other things on the market we don't know much about, like Kratom and Delta alternatives and all those things that are so hard to keep up with these days. You can go to the next one. So real quickly, I just wanted to ask you all a couple of questions here. What's your experience been with addiction and substance use? What trends are you currently seeing or wanting to learn more about? And or what are the clinical and spiritual concerns regarding this issue? So this might tailor my conversation a little bit. Every time I do these, I like to be a little more interactive, understand what you all want to learn. But I'm just curious, out of any of these questions, if anyone would like to share maybe trends they're seeing, things they want to learn more about, or if they have certain concerns that have been a pattern for them. Yeah, please. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Tammy, and thank you for the work you do with the homeless population. Yeah, please.
Actually, Reverend Starla Abraham. I work for the Department of Family Protective Services for faith-based and community engagement, so we're right there with the bridge, in the bridge. And I want to know more about how do we get help in the outlying areas, because that's the problem. Even when we come across there is a problem, people need help or even want help, they can't get it because it's not in their immediate community, or they don't have transportation to make it to the Metroplex.
Okay, thank you. That's a good one. Yeah, we got a couple of hands. I'll take a couple more.
Hi, my name is Daniqua Lewis, and I'm with DFPS as well, our faith-based community engagement department. And I would like for you to explain and talk more about Kratom and those gas station drugs that people are being more susceptible to, and how that impacts, just mental health, behavioral health for individuals that they may not recognize because they don't see them as illegal.
Absolutely, thank you.
Hi, my name is Eddie Pratt. I'm a licensed pastor, and also I have a counseling business dealing with relationships. It's mostly my niche.
Okay.
I think one of the biggest concerns that I have is the very last question. And we did a conference, it's a group of us, we did a conference in California called When Shepherds Bleed. And that was to help people in ministry deal with their mental health and not the separation of clinical professionals not doing what we're doing here, having spiritual, the blending of spiritual and clinical coming together, merging together, because the marriage of that helps people, I believe, not feel like and I've heard a lot of pastors say this, well, the reason why you're sick or why you're dealing with depression because you don't have enough Jesus in you. It just burns me up to hear that, because that person might need medication to get through what they're going through, but they're scared to talk to people in their church, talk to their pastor or whatever the case may be. I just wanted to know more movements like this, of how we merge the two professionals to be able, or the cycles of people dealing with these things, how we merge those two to work together versus separate separate from each other.
Yeah.
And well, the scientists say this, and the scientists don't want to hear what the spiritual says, and the spiritual don't want to listen to what the scientists say. And so I just think that the merging of the two brings a different kind of wholeness to people that are suffering in these different ways.
Okay, thank you. And I'll leave some time for questions after. These were a good start. You said the conference was When Shepherds Bleed? Is that what you said? That's an incredible name. Thank you. We'll go to the next slide. I think I can answer some questions here. So I want to talk about this, and I'll get back to the kratom because I think this will fit with this slide. That addiction isn't always a substance, right? We live in a capitalist society whose marketing is based around driving addictive behaviors. This is not a knock at capitalism. This is just where we are in this country, right? We have a generation that has grown up without knowing what life is before Google, without never knowing what the ability was like before to not be able to get answers easily, to not be able to access pornography with 2 clicks, to not be able to play games. Even if parents are putting in all the monitoring, right? There are a lot of processes that can drive constant hits of dopamine that have rewired our brains in a way we really haven't evolved to catch up to, right? And there's a lot of really, if you ever want to read about this, Dopamine Nation is an incredible book. It talks all about the country and kind of how dopamine shapes the brain, especially young minds. But we're seeing this thing where some people in my field, I don't like the all or nothing talk. I've been trained very young to not use that. But I do think that a lot of people end up gravitating to an addictive process at some point in their life to cope, right? It could be something that seems healthy in the time, right? I've worked with people that exercise consistently, but it's so much that they won't go on a cruise with their family because the gym doesn't hold the standards of what they need. Or they'll exercise even after breaking an ankle, right? Maybe that's addiction, right? And so when we look at addiction, I want to talk about, we know the substances, and I wish I had more time, I could go into all of it, but beyond the substances, the alcohol, the drugs, the kratom, someone said, the marijuana, the meth, all of these other things, I'm seeing a rise of gambling, sports betting, and prediction mark betting. If you know what Kalshi is, people betting on politics and the Iranian war and different things. Last time I talked to TCU, that was their biggest issue. They had a mental health congregation and conference, and they said, right now our biggest issue is our students are spending way too much money on sports betting, and now they owe people money. Now they can't pay for rent, right? So these are local problems. Problematic sexual behavior, I'm seeing more and more and more of that. I think that's an underreported, really not well understood and studied because people hide it, right? But pornography and sex addiction is a really big problem in this country. This is the #1 issue that I worked with pastors in the past when I used to work for LifeWorks, because LifeWorks was a sex addiction place. I don't specialize in sex addiction. I usually refer out, but regardless, I still work with it. It's something that comes up a lot. Gaming and video game addiction. Again, addictions look different, right? And how they affect the brain. Gambling is the only behavioral addiction that we can diagnose and bill insurance for right now. So it's widely researched. You can go to treatment for it. You can go to residential for it. All the other ones, you have to find something else to diagnose them with, like depression or impulse control disorder or what have you. My therapists know this already. But just for you all know, that's a controversial topic that I won't get into today, but I want you to know they all affect the brain similarly. And these are typically the behaviors that I'm working with clients once they get sober. They're no longer drinking, they're no longer using meth, they're no longer taking kratom, they're on and on and on, but now they're spending $500 a week at Amazon, or they're eating. I had a woman recently, she was eating a whole thing of cookie dough every night, and she never had cookie dough, but sugar releases dopamine, and they have cravings at night because that's when they drank. Right? So these are things to look for, and I'll talk more about how to discern if something's an addiction or not, because that can be a little difficult and interesting, right? But I want to say, I'll just quote the research here, behavioral addictions activate the same reward pathways in the brain as substances, particularly the dopamine reward system, right? Someone asked about kratom, so let me talk about that just for a second before I move on, because I did do a speech, a lecture to the Arlington Police Department and then the Arlington CPS not long ago about this, and it was really interesting getting their perspective. If you're going to walk away with anything today, if it's barely legal, it's not research, it's not FDA approved, and it's a drug, it's probably terrible for you, right? K2 was killing people out the park, one use. It's still killing a lot of people in prison systems. Right now, marijuana alternatives, usually you're fine, but you're rolling a dice, and sometimes you could experience psychosis, things you don't typically experience from regular old marijuana. I really fell into that, and I talked about Delta-8 and all the alternatives for years, did some lectures on it, because I was having TCU students experience psychosis or not sleep for 3 or 4 days because of this. And they came from California. They know a lot about weed. They've smoked a lot of it, and suddenly they're throwing plates at their mother, or they're forgetting their name and running away from home, and all these things that you don't really typically see. You're not going to see unless you're smoking a Snoop Dogg amount with marijuana from a dispensary, right? I'm not advocating for marijuana use. I'm just saying the alternatives are dangerous. Kratom, which some of us like to call gas station heroin right now, that's kind of the coined term in the addiction professional community. Kratom is a substance that's technically illegal in Texas, but it's still on the market. You can get it all over the place. In low doses, it acts like a stimulant, so it gives you a little bit of a boost. High doses, it acts like an opioid or a painkiller. So most people have turned to it because there was some exciting research around it being successful for withdrawals from heroin and pain pills and any kind of opioid. The problem is you can get very addicted to it very quickly. And the longest detox I've seen in my 11 years of treating substance use was off Kratom. I had a gentleman that did 15 days. 15 days of flu-like symptoms, sweating, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, you name it. 15 days. Even my treating psychiatrist at the time at Sante I've never seen this in my career. So he was using a lot, right? A lot. It's not typical, but it's good to be aware. And if you hear these kind of things, maybe refer them to someone, right? I'll keep moving because I got a lot to cover. So justifications for use, symptom management. Maybe they're anxious, maybe they're depressed, maybe they're wanting to dissociate and not experience life for a while, right? Like how some of us like to go home and Netflix something for 5 to 10 hours. Maybe it's euphoria, right? They just want to feel good. Peer pressure, coping with anxiety, stress, maybe to relax or to fall asleep at night. Sleep's a big one, right? I know people that have never drank or done any drugs, and now they're taking the gummies to fall asleep, right? So the one I forgot to put up here is coping with trauma. This is usually an unconscious process. Usually there's something going on, right? My parents left me at a young age. I was abandoned. I went through a horrific event. And whenever I have those feelings, even if I'm not aware of what's causing them, I want to placate those feelings. I, as a professional, like to explore how substance use has helped that person. I think that's really important. The DARE program doesn't work, y'all. There's a reason we don't do that anymore, right? Don't do drugs, they're bad. No, probably these things serve them at some point. I like to say that we use substances until they begin to use us, and that's when we need to take a step away, right? I've had clients where, they had very abusive parents, and the only way they did not end their own life was drinking, right? Drinking in some roundabout way kept them alive. I'm not advocating for drinking, but at one point it was a tool they used when they didn't know what else to do, and now it's a tool they don't need. They're on their own. They can find independence and autonomy, right? So we try to explore the relationship of the pros and cons and then where they're at today, right? But I'll keep moving and kind of explain how that looks. So searching for signs. How do we know if something's an addiction or not? I don't always use the word addiction, right? I try to explore with the client what verbiage they're comfortable with. Sometimes I do, right? If they have been to the hospital 5 times this year for alcohol detox, I think we need to call it an addiction. They have 3 DWIs. We might need to call it that. But there are plenty of people that get DWIs and they just made a poor decision, right? And so I think it's important to look for signs, figure out what language they use. Like with sexual addiction, I usually use the word problematic sexual behavior. It's a little more strength-based. I don't know what's going on. I used to run a program with college students at TCU for 3 years. I mean, yeah, some of these students were drinking 5 days a week in excess. Also, so was everyone else in their fraternity house. Is that an addiction? I don't know. It might be that they're 18 and they're partying a little too hard, right? So there's a lot of context to look at. Age, quantity, quality, all of those things. But I think if you walk away with anything, one thing I tell my clients often when they're sitting in that chair is everyone that sat in their chair with addiction has one thing in common. They've started to violate their values. Whatever your value system is has started to falter. If your value system is strong work ethic and now you're running late to work, if your values are to be engaged with your child and now you're too busy thinking about the next drink or how you're going to hide this from your wife or your husband, that's a value violation, right? And the more you see of those, the more likely that person might have an addiction, and it might be worth looking at, or at least it's problematic, right? So explore their values, explore what's important to them, and how has that become less and less important, and how has that thing, that substance, that behavior become a replacement for that. Does that make sense? So that's what I look for is values. Secrecy, right? I really liked what Pastor John, everything he said about depression, I think also can relate to this issue of substance use, right? Addiction thrives in secrecy and silence and shame. You know, the 3 S's is what I call it. And it starts to wilter in safe places. It starts to wilter when we're vulnerable with the appropriate people. You don't want to go to the Kroger cashier and be like, I think I'm an alcoholic, right? But it can be helpful to talk to people that will hold some space for you. And this is where these rooms come in, this building, this huge building, comes into the fold, right? Because this is often where people come first. You'd be surprised where sometimes people find sobriety, but taking those steps and finding people to take those steps with is a huge part of it. So are they defensive? Is there a lot of secrecy? Is responsibility starting to wax and wane? They're neglecting things they used to really, really attune to and be a big part of it. The simplest definition of addiction, continued use despite negative consequences, right? That gets complicated, but I mean, that's the DSM diagnosis. The first thing they talk about is continued use despite negative consequences. So if you get a DWI, again, doesn't mean you're an alcoholic, but if you get a DWI and you're drinking the next morning and then you're getting back in the car the next week, you might have a problem. That might be worth exploring. So emotional instability or difficulties regulating one's emotions when in the past maybe they were able to. Obviously, there could be other factors. They could be going through a divorce. There could be trauma, right? But these are just signs to look for. And the more they compound, the more prevalent maybe this issue is. And just presenting out of character, right? So DSM framework, it's up here, loss of control, cravings, tolerance, life disruption. Those are kind of the key indicators. We look for mild, moderate, severe, and that just depends on how many symptoms they have, right? And we can keep going. Thank you. So I'll just present to you a very quick assessment. This was an assessment I used to use when I was at TCU because it was difficult to get an 18 and 19-year-old to admit maybe I need to talk to someone, and even more difficult to get them to spend 5 minutes with me, right? So when I had 5 to 15 minutes, I did something called a mini assessment with them. It was free. It was just kind of a way to have a conversation. And again, I want to emphasize, when I ran that program, we were a harm reduction program. So we weren't complete abstinence. We would work with students if they were willing to show up as long as it wasn't dangerous. Most programs are abstinence-based, and I'll talk a little bit about the differences. But the CAGE questionnaire, I think, is a really easy, it's free, you can Google it. It's essentially 4 questions, and if they answer 2 yes, then there's a clinically significant chance that they could have a substance use disorder, right? We call it substance use disorder in our industry, as most of you know. I think the odds are about 67%, so 67% if they answer 2, that goes up to around 80 if they answer 3, and 4 goes up to the 90s bracket. So they're also very open-ended. You know, have you felt the need to cut down on your use? Have people annoyed you or criticized by your use or your behaviors? Have you ever felt bad or guilty about your use? And have you needed a drink or to use drugs first thing in the morning? That's a huge indicator, right? If you're doing something first thing in the morning. As you see, the 4th question doesn't necessarily apply to behavioral addictions typically, but definitely substance addiction. So really quick questionnaire you can ask people that kind of gives you an idea of, is this maybe worth exploring clinically, right? Go next one. All right, so let's talk about the approach. I'm going to talk a little bit about motivational interviewing, also a little bit about stigma and some destigmatizing phrases you can use as we go through it. Yeah, next one. So first we'll talk about how to strengthen recovery, the evidence for that. I mean, I think the main way, and I'm seeing more and more, I love being in a church talking about this because I'm seeing more and more churches work unilaterally and across the board to address these issues in-house and out-of-house, right? I think that is a huge strength of this Metroplex specifically. Texas is not great for mental health. We're ranked number 49 in this country, and we have been for a while. We have a ways to go. If you need mental health residential treatment, you have to leave Texas, right? Because we don't provide that in-house. We refer out. We have plenty of addiction. If you have substance use, we'll find you something. But if you have mental health primary, you're going to Oklahoma, you're going to another state. So we have a long way to go. And I think that's why the community has done a good job at rising up, to fill that need and that gap. There's a lot to fill, right? 1 out of 4 adults in America have a mental health disorder, right? And substance use, it varies. You know, last I checked, said 1 out of 8, but I've heard a lot of different statistics. So COVID definitely added to that, right? So strengthening recovery is just having an open conversation, allowing the means. You know, when I see a church that has programs in place that offer an open conversation for this, I know that I can send my clients there and it's a safe place. It doesn't mean they have to have that to be a safe place, right? But it's just going that extra mile, like here's a platform to explore these things with other people. Providing meaning during suffering. And that is I'm a bit of an existential counselor. I geek out over this, but what is, I don't know if you've ever heard the term. I really love the term Dr. Linehan quotes often. It was actually a term created by a monk who was talking about running. I wish I could remember his name, but the term is pain is inevitable, suffering is optional, right? Just like Pastor John said earlier, we are mortal beings. Our lives end here, right? We all sin, right? We all will go through different traumatic events or different difficulties. How we respond to that and the suffering that we create out of that can be managed, right? That's easier said than done, but how can we find meaning through our suffering? And as I get into 12-step recovery, there's a lot of meaning making behind that, right? There's a lot of ways to get sober. I want to say that right now. But finding meaning through suffering is an incredible aspect of recovery. I think not just from substance use, but also from mental illness, right? Encouraging humility, accountability, forgiveness, knowing what that looks like. Accountability is so key. And I tell my clients all the time, if I'm the only person that knows about this, we have to change that. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. I'm so glad you're here. There are plenty of people that aren't talking about their issues to anyone. And if we want to address this, let's grow that, right? Creating supportive recovery communities. I think we still have a lot to learn about mental health and addiction. A lot. We got a long way to go. If we didn't, we would have better outcomes, right? We've come a long way. You know, we're not zapping people. We're not putting them in cold water and doing all these things. Maybe this will work, right? We have a better sense of how to work with people. I think the one thing that's not going to change regardless is connection is the opposite of addiction. Connection is how people heal, right? And that's why in 2020 it was really hard to heal, right? So connection is a big part of this. Connection to yourself and other people and a higher power, whatever that is for you. That could be God, it could be something else. And referring individuals to clinical care when appropriate. I'll talk more about that. There's a lot of evidence, and the Kelly et al. I put here is a meta-analysis, so tons of research collected into this and large sample sizes. But individuals with strong spiritual or religious engagement show higher recovery rates, greater resilience in addiction recovery. Anecdotally speaking, that's what I've seen too. I do want to say, and I know I'm in a church saying this, people can get sober without religion. It can, but they need spirituality, right? I've seen it all. I've seen people get sober without therapy. You know, there's a lot of different ways that people can find recovery, and finding it spiritually or religiously is a big part of it, right? I was working with a guy, we were working on spirituality and religion, and he was religious, right? But there was something missing for him. And I like to do inner child work and explore what did you do for fun before you drank? What did you do for fun as a child before society told you how to live and how to be? And it was guitar. And that was his spiritual connection, right? And he was able to bridge that with the church. It was separate at first and then together, but that was the missing piece. A lot of people with addiction, they don't know how to have fun. And that's why they keep relapsing. It's not the only reason, but sometimes that's a reason, right? So we got to figure that out. Spiritual practices that can include prayer, meditation, community worship also helps with the emotional regulation part, which is what people are using with substances, right? Go to the next one. So I want to talk about some examples of things I've heard, things have come up in the research. Honestly, in my work with clients and spiritual leaders, things have gotten a lot better than 10 years ago in my experience, and I don't know about you all. So I heard some of these things from people's pastors maybe a decade ago. I haven't really heard it much lately. It's mostly come from families and loved ones that don't understand, or they're exhausted, and that's fair. They're emotionally exhausted. Their loved ones have put them through the ringer with their addiction. They're thinking about letting go, moving on. They're exasperated, right? But I want to talk a little bit about maybe ways we can change the conversation and how we hold space when people are talking to us about their issues, right? So the first one I put up here is you just need to pray more, right? You don't have enough Jesus. Pastor John said the same thing, right? I love that he said that. So maybe instead we can say, let's pray for God to guide the hands of your doctors, your therapists, for your peace during your treatment, right? This is one that I've seen sometimes where people have almost taken a step away from their congregation because they felt that they weren't heard. Like, I am praying. I'm praying 8 hours a day. It's not enough, right? And this is a multifaceted thing, right? If you had more faith, you wouldn't be blank. You wouldn't be drinking. You wouldn't be using. You wouldn't be looking at porn, right? I really liked this. Your faith is a source of strength even when your health is a struggle, right? Y'all can tailor it however you want, right? But don't take medication. Just trust in God. Controversial topic, right? There are a lot of religions and different congregations that are against medication, right? So we want to explore that. Does that work for the client? Does it not? My goal is for my clients to fire me, to be less and less relevant in their lives, right? They can come back when they're ready, but that's my goal. My goal is for you to fire me. And my goal is for clients to be on as little medication as they need. If they need the great, work with your doctor. I'm not a doctor. But if you don't need to be on 8 and you can find something that works for you with your doctor, and great, right? Let's figure out what that is. So another way to say it, medication could be a tool God uses to help bring stability, right? Some would argue that God gave us the knowledge to create this, right? To help people. So again, I know there's a lot of different maybe opinions about this, but just a way to think about it, right? So we've really tried to take a step back from substance abuse in a lot of communities and maybe say substance misuse or problematic use or a substance use disorder. The word abuse, right? There's kind of a negative connotation that comes with that, right? I'm not trying to pick everything apart, but it's just something to think about because it's definitely bothered some of the people I've worked with when they hear that word abuse, right? Or even mental health issues instead of mentally ill, right? Sometimes when they hear ill, they think, all right, this defines me. So it's important. Words are important, right? I've worked in suicide prevention for 20 years. I've lost several people to suicide, relatives, friends. I've gained a lot of people to suicide recovery. I've done a lot of work with AFSP and all that. So I'm very passionate about let's stop saying committed suicide. Let's say completed suicide or they ended their life. Committed suicide is kind of a final way of saying they died a criminal, right? And that's how the families experience it. So for justice for the families, please try to stop saying committed suicide. Let's say completed suicide or they ended their life because it reduces that implication of criminality. And this is something that some people don't care, some people do, but they're clean now, right? I'm 90 days clean, I'm clean. Kind of implies they're dirty, right? That person was dirty at one point. You can say sober, 90 days sober, free from alcohol. I use the words they use. If they want to say clean, great, I'll use that, right? If they want to say I'm an addict, I'll say, all right, you're more than an addict, you have an addiction. But if you identify that and that helps you get help, great, because that's what they say in the rooms of AA and NA, right? So just some ways that you can hold space with compassion, right? I'll talk briefly. This could be a whole 3-hour thing, but motivational interviewing is something I think everyone would benefit from. I usually don't use the word everyone. In their daily lives, it's a great way, as a leader, as a previous director, is a great way to motivate my clinicians, is a great way to motivate my clients for treatment. It's a pretty straightforward approach just to enhance motivation for change. It's used in corporations as well. The principles, empathy, develop discrepancy between their values. Here's the values conversation again, and their behavior, right? How is this aligning, right? I was working with a client who had a pretty significant sex addiction and was seeking out prostitutes. And I just asked him one day, what are you looking for when you engage with these women? What do you hope to get out of it? He's like, I just want to be accepted and loved. I'm like, okay, well, have you tried ordering a steak at Starbucks? He just looked at me, what? I'm like, you won't find love there and acceptance, right? It's kind of like ordering a steak at Starbucks. That's not aligning with your values. So how can we move towards that, right? And for some reason, it clicked for him. Some people would be really mad when I say that, but for him, our relationship could handle it. So roll with the resistance instead of arguing. You know, why are you doing this? You know it's killing you. Yeah, they know, right? The arguing tends to hit a wall, right? Okay, all right, yeah, I see this is, you're pretty determined to keep doing this. Tell me more about that. What's in it for you? What could happen if you continue, right? There's a way to roll with resistance. And support their autonomy. You know, I really try to encourage clients to build something outside of me, you know, and find bridges that lead you to the path you want to go back onto. Just some helpful questions. How is this affecting the life you want to live? What concerns do you have about your use? What are your concerns? They've heard enough about their families and their loved ones' concerns. What are your concerns? What might life look like if you stopped or if things improved a little bit? I had a guy I was working with that was smoking weed from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And we're very slowly, right now I got him 1 p.m. He's not smoking past 6. That's great. It's a big step for him. He's not waking and baking anymore. He wants to quit, but he doesn't want to quit, right? And we're rolling with that ambivalence. And that's what I asked, like, what are some small steps you can take? He's like, you know what? I can stop smoking as soon as I wake up. Great idea. That's your idea. Let's roll with that. And he's doing it, right? Little things we can do to work towards it, because that first step is really scary, right? It's like telling a marathon runner to stop running. Hey, stop running. You know, it's something they do all their life. It's their coping skill, and we're going to rip it away. That's scary, right? And I think it's good to validate that. We can go to the next one. It's important to focus on guilt instead of shame, right? Shame plays a tape, I am a mistake. Guilt plays a tape, I made a mistake. Shame is corrosive. It's highly associated with suicide, addiction, eating disorders, depression, anxiety. Guilt, inversely correlated, right? Guilt is what drives behavior. Shame, if I bully someone in high school and I feel ashamed of it, I'm like, man, I'm just like my dad, right? I'm a monster. I'm going to keep bullying. If I feel guilty about it, I might go apologize to that person, right? So guilt can be corrective, and we want to try to move people to guilt. The way we do that is just offering open space for them to talk, right? So motivational interviewing, it's been shown, this is not the only approach. This is just one of the nuances to get people engaged and remain engaged. But they have a great system called OARS, where you use open-ended questions. You affirm, right? You affirm what they're doing. How are you doing right now? How is your drinking right now? I'm proud of you for talking to me. That sounds really hard to wake up without a drink and wake up shaking in the morning. Okay, so, and then summary, right? Okay, so here are all the things you're working on. Here are the ways you could probably improve this week. This is just kind of counseling 101, and they taught us very early in grad school, as many of you know. But it's just important to note, people rarely change when they're argued into something. They change when they're empowered to do it, right? We can go to the next one. Kind of a brief overview of motivational interviewing. You can take I've taken a 3-hour class on that. There's a lot you can explore. I want to talk about the clinical support and fellowship. I'll also spend a little bit of time, mindful of time, but I'll spend time on local resources too. We can go to the next one. and just kind of blow through those. So multiple levels of care. Most of those levels of care are on all the tables. Go talk to them because they're it. I started from the most intensive level of care all the way to the least intensive level of care. What people need varies, right? Medical detox, right? Typically in a hospital, but a lot of residential treatment centers offer them. Alcohol and benzodiazepines can literally kill you from detox. That's why COVID, no liquor store in the world shut down, right? If you're drinking 3 bottles of wine a night, it's a central nervous system depressant. You've created a new homeostasis in everything. Your cardiovascular rhythm, everything has been slowed down. If you rip that away suddenly, that can cause seizures, right? It's rare, but it happens. And that's why medical detox exists. So refer to a professional if someone's drinking daily, because they may need to talk to someone. They may need medical detox. It might not be safe. I had a client once that refused medical detox, saw him again a year later, and he was like, man, I wish I went. Like, I was walking down the stairs, and I seized and fell, and he broke his back. And now he has a permanent L1, L2 fracture, right? It can happen when you're driving, you know? I'm not trying to fearmonger here. I'm just saying things I've seen and why sometimes it's appropriate. Residential treatment, you can spend hours on that. There's so many. There's some around here you can talk to. Residential treatment, more intensive care. I usually tell people, once a week, I'm kind of crawling towards your goals. IOP, intensive outpatient, that's walking towards your goals, and rehab's running towards your goals, right? Everyone needs something different, but the more intensive, usually, the better off they are. I get it. Sometimes that's not in the cards. They're a single parent, you know, or they're a business owner and a single parent, something like that. But these are just all the levels. So medical detox, residential, partial hospitalization is kind of a step down where they come during the day and then they go home at night. It's typically a step down in care from residential. Intensive outpatients, what I did 7 years, it's 10 hours a week. There's a group component. A lot of times it's a step down in care from residential or just a step up from someone like me. Sober living and sober coaching, another great resource. A lot of accountability, a great resource if people are chronically relapsing and they struggle with community. And sober coaches can be a great resource because they don't have the restrictions that therapists have. I had a sober coach working with a client who didn't know how to do laundry. He didn't know how to cook. He didn't know how to grocery shop. And this person helped them with that while helping them skip the alcohol aisle, right? So they all have their place. Outpatient counseling, that me and a lot of others that run around here, one-on-one work. Sometimes there's couples counseling that goes into that, or family counseling as well, trauma treatment. And then peer support groups, which I'll get to in the next slide. Or the slide after that. That's okay. So connection is key, right? I am happy to share this with y'all. Y'all can take a card. I can give you all this. There's a lot more resources out there than what I listed, but it can feel very lonely to get sober, right? Especially if they're cutting off people. A lot of people do. They cut people out, right? They're changing everything in their life, especially if they're young. I work with a lot of young adults, and that's a big change for them. And so it's a big component of this. So I just put some resources that I recommend for people. The Meetup app is just kind of generic. It's a way to meet people. Phoenix Recovery, if you haven't heard of it, huge fan of Phoenix Recovery. It's a nonprofit. It's for anyone that's 2 days sober can attend. They do hikes, they do jams, poetry slams, skating, rock climbing, exercise, meditations. They do all kinds of stuff. It's a free program nationwide. I believe it's in 40 states now. Great way to meet other people in recovery, and it's not 12-step. It's just, hey, let's go do something, right? And we're also not using. So great resource. There's a lot of sober apps, Sober Grid, Sober Tool, obviously AA, NA. They're everywhere, right? The book of AA is one of the most, it's not far behind the Bible and the Quran as one of the most translated books in the world as far as languages. I think it's over 190 languages now. So there's a reason, right? It's very prolific, and it's a great resource to build accountability and do some step work, which helps heal shame and find meaning in recovery. NAMI is great. I love NAMI, especially for my families. I work with a lot of families. NAMI has a lot of support groups for families that have someone with mental health issues and or addiction in their family. A relatively new recovery program, Recovery Dharma. Have y'all heard of Recovery Dharma? A few of you have. It's based in the tenets of Buddhism from a secular aspect, so it's very heavy on meditation. It's very heavy on total acceptance and uses a lot of, honestly, things we use in therapy, but tenets of Buddhism to help people. And you, with this aspect of Buddhism, you can have any religion and still apply those tenets of Buddhism. So Smart Recovery is great. Not great on community typically, but great with skills. They use CBT. They teach people how to challenge their addictive thinking and really just how to navigate life differently. And it also helps with anxiety and depression. So you usually get a lot of skills from that you won't get sometimes from 12-step, but the community is usually not great. So there's pros and cons to all of them. There's college-centered organizations I've worked with. Foundation 45, if you haven't heard of that, they're located in Dallas. They have free mental health support groups for recovery. Remix Recovery is what I call it. They have a women of color group. They have art therapy, suicide prevention group. I've had a lot of clients use them. MHA Dallas, Mental Health Alliance, Greater Dallas. Sounds like NTBHA over there is another good resource as well. We can go to the next one. I'll get into a little, so let's talk about faith-based recovery groups. Celebrate Recovery is the biggest one right now in this country. It's essentially the tenets of AA, the 12 steps of AA, but it's Christ, right? They created a program that was all-inclusive, so you can go there. This is most programs, right? I can't speak to all, but you have a sex addiction, you have codependency issues, you have alcohol, heroin. Most people are substance use, but I've had people go for porn, I've had people go for eating, and it creates this open space for people to explore that while bringing in a relationship with Christ, right? They're typically 2 hours, typically they have a 1 hour, and then they break the women and men. It's helped a lot of my clients. Regen is another one. I believe Watermark started Regen. Great program. I had a lot of clients use Regen as well, and that started to expand. There's no one-size-fits-all to this. I tell people it's like finding the right church or finding the right gym. You just got to shop around, and that's okay. 12-step faith-based groups, right? They tend to talk about God of our own understanding, AA, NA, right? I worked with probably the most militant atheist I've ever met, had a lot of trauma growing up as a gay woman, very against the idea of God. She texted me a year ago and said, "Hey, Nick, I'm 4 years sober. Thank you for pushing me to do AA. It saved my life," right? I just told her, find what works for you. You can find an atheist in AA, right? You can figure out what this is, and she did, right? So I think these things can work for anyone with the right attitude and approach and doing a little bit of shopping around. Benefits, reduces isolation, shame, creates accountability. Accountability is the biggest thing. I tell my clients, you call me at 11 at night, fiending for a drink on a Saturday, I'm not going to answer. That's a reality. That's kind of my boundaries, right? You're going to need to find people in this light that'll help you, right? And recovery is not about stopping a behavior. It's about replacement. It's about building a new community and identity, right? Got 10 minutes? Okay. We can go to the next one. So again, resource building, just to kind of map it out for you, what's all out there, because there's a lot. There's the clinical levels of care, right? There's the me's and the them's, and looking at what that looks like. A lot of times that they have insurance is covered, but there are programs out there like Homeward Bound and different other programs that will work with people that don't have insurance, don't have the means. So there are, even though Texas is 49 in the state, there are usually resources. Just like there are resources, forgive me, I can't remember the name. I work a lot with, someone might know the name, but there's a company that works with, takes people's dogs while they go into residential treatment. What was it called? Dogs Matter? Thank you. I can't remember the name. I've worked with Dogs Matter a lot. Like, there's so many nuances of care, right? Because I've had that a lot. I can't go to treatment. I got my puppy, right? All right, well, I got a solution for you, right? So trying to find ways to navigate the excuses and the barriers, right? Psychoeducation is huge, especially for the families. All of my clients, if they allow it, I will bring their spouse in at some point. I'm not a couples therapist. I have training, but I don't love it. I usually refer out and I coordinate with them. But almost all of my clients with addiction, I will bring their loved ones in and we'll talk. And I'll say, hey, we're not going to talk about your sex life or money or how to raise your child. We're going to talk about, what do you think recovery is? how are you engaged, and how are you not willing to be engaged? And let me tell you what it could be. And I don't call them codependents. We can sometimes, but I feel like sometimes the families, I'm a family member with addiction, right? Diagnosing and labeling the family. I think most times, they're just having a normal reaction to a really abnormal situation, right? And so I validate that with them. And when they meet a therapist and they know that we're not just shrinks that are judging them the whole time, sometimes they'll get therapy too, right? So there's a secondary gain to that. But building their education is so key, right, in fostering what recovery could look like. Because the reality is maybe they go do 30 days of treatment, they make all these changes, then they come home and life keeps spinning, right? Their spouse is still doing what they're doing, their kids, right? And there might be adjustments to that they can learn about. 12-step recovery, already went over that. Phoenix Recovery is another one. There's a lot of collegiate recovery programs out there these days. Texas Tech is the golden standard of collegiate recovery. They created a handbook of how to establish collegiate recovery in any single college that has been used nationwide. I got to go to the Collegiate Recovery Conference in Virginia a couple years ago, and it was amazing. There's at least 400 collegiate recovery programs. These are open spaces where college students can come together and support each other. It's peer support. It's not AA, but it's ish, right? It has some tenets of that without the principles, but it's just a way for college students to get sober, right? TEC-CPA is the local convention for that. I wish I could remember I always forget what it stands for. But it's the youth program. You can go any age. My 55-year-old client went recently. They had their last one in, I think, Arlington or Irving, but they travel all around Texas, and it's a huge convention. And then a lot of AA groups. They also have retreats, men and women retreats that are really impactful. There's a lot out there. And then hobbies. What are you doing, right? What are you doing for fun? What are you doing to make this worth it, or at least a little more bearable? What did you do in the past? What could you see yourself doing that maybe substance use got in the way of, right? We can go to the next one. So closing thoughts. Take some time to understand your client's worldview, who they are, what they believe, their culture. Don't be afraid to ask what you don't know. I will whip out my phone when a client says something, especially if they're like 19. I'm like, okay, Urban Dictionary, what did my client just say, right? And we'll laugh together, but I mean, don't pretend to know what you don't know, right? I do this all the time, and there's still new drugs coming out. I'm like, what is that? What does that do? And I have to figure it out with them, right? Shame often prevents full disclosure. It's very likely their use reported is less than what it actually is. My old clinical director said double whatever they say if they've ever done treatment. There's shame around that, right? Actually admitting how much it is. Encourage them to seek help. Psychology today is your best friend, but you got a lot of resources here to seek out to. Peer support's great. Remember, there's no one way to recover from addiction. Some people get upset when I say this, but there's not one way. If there was, people would be doing better, right? AA is not the only way. Church, therapy, right? Everyone's different in what they need. And just validate the work's important. It may be easy. It may not be easy, but it'll be worth it. The next one. The end. Thank y'all for having me. Go next one. Those are just resources. And then next one. All right. I don't have much time, but do we have time for questions? Like 1, 2? Did anyone have any questions? Comments? Complaints? All right. Thank y'all for having me.